The sky above Sydney's harbour carried a heavy clarity unmatched in most American minds before they landed, an expanse of sun-bleached blue that seemed to promise endless possibility. Yet beneath that brilliance, a quieter truth took shape in the rhythms of daily life for many Americans who came with optimism and stayed for seasons that stretched into years. The early months were an intoxicating blend of warm breezes and new accents, beaches that redefined the colour blue, and the curious ease with which local strangers greeted one another. But as the novelty settled, an undercurrent of cultural contrast pulled at the edges of their experience, a swifter undercurrent than anyone back home might have expected. One rooted in the slower pulse of Australian society and the demanding cadence of American ambition. Initially, many Americans noticed the way conversations drifted within cafes overlooking the Pacific, how talk of work felt casual even on a Monday morning, how a midweek swim was treated as essential as a morning coffee. It was a rhythm that echoed the Australian value of balance, life lived beyond the confines of professional identity. This was intoxicating for newcomers raised in cultures where success was measured in hours billed and goals achieved. In Australia, the stark absence of hustle culture felt like a bomb and a challenge all at once. There were weekends that stretched long with unhurried barbecues and spontaneous trips to clifftop lookouts. But beneath these moments was a simmering tension for some, the question of belonging in a society that prized leisure without apology. As months passed, the subtle differences in values became more pronounced. Many Americans found themselves marveling at public holidays that didn't bend to commercial pressures, at workplaces where camaraderie sometimes eclipsed competition, and at social rituals that prized ease of interaction over polished efficiency. Yet this very ease could also be interpreted as a lack of drive, at least through the lens of American expectations. The applause for a balanced life sometimes felt like a critique of relentless pursuit, and the gentle insistence on rest became an internal conflict for those who equated constant motion with worth. Economics played its part too. The cost of living in major cities like Sydney and Melbourne hovered high, intersecting with a global inflation that strained wallets and patience alike. Secure job prospects that matched American qualifications were not always as plentiful as hoped, and the local job market, even for skilled professionals, demanded adaptability to norms that felt unfamiliar. Healthcare, education, and daily expenses became points of reflection, especially as American families contemplated long-term stability in a land that was beautiful, yet financially unyielding. This combination of cultural rhythm and economic realignment stirred a shift. Many Americans began to see that the romance of the ocean breeze could not alone outweigh the pragmatic questions of future horizons. Conversations once filled with the thrill of discovery slowly turned toward the familiar contours of home, the magnetic pull of established networks, and the certainty of long-held career paths. When the first departures were booked, it was not the beaches or the friendly greetings being left behind, it was the resolution that balance without opportunity could sustain a life built on ambition. In their wake, the landscape remained unchanged in its beauty, but the stories of those who stayed and those who left began to reveal a deeper cultural negotiation, a reconciliation between the allure of slowed time and the relentless momentum of American aspiration. Over time, the emotional climate of this negotiation became harder to ignore. Many Americans discovered that the Australian emphasis on understatement extended beyond humour and into ambition itself. Achievements were acknowledged, but rarely amplified. Success was meant to sit quietly, not announce itself. In offices and social settings alike, overt self-promotion was often met with polite deflection rather than admiration. For individuals shaped by a culture where visibility and upward motion are central to progress, this subtle restraint created an invisible ceiling, one not enforced by policy, but by social expectation. Daily interactions reinforced this feeling. Networking unfolded slowly, built on familiarity rather than urgency. Professional relationships were forged over time, often outside formal settings, and advancement depended as much on cultural fluency as technical skill. Many Americans noticed that speed was not rewarded in the same way it was back home. Decisions took longer. Processes favored consensus. Momentum was replaced by patience. While this approach fostered stability and reduced stress for locals, it left some newcomers feeling suspended, waiting for a signal that never quite arrived. There was also the quiet weight of distance. Australia's geographic isolation, once romanticised as adventure, gradually revealed its psychological cost. Flights home were long, expensive, and infrequent. Time zones fractured communication with family and colleagues back in the United States, turning once spontaneous conversations into carefully scheduled exchanges. Over holidays and milestones, the separation felt sharper. The vast ocean that once symbolized freedom became a reminder of how far removed daily life had become from familiar emotional anchors. Social integration, though warm on the surface, sometimes remained shallow. Australians were welcoming, but friendships tended to be long established, rooted in shared history rather than rapid connection. Invitations were friendly, laughter was easy, yet deeper bonds formed slowly. Many Americans sensed an unspoken boundary: kindness without intrusion, openness without obligation. This contrasted sharply with the intensity of American social networks, where connections often accelerate quickly and blur personal and professional lines. As these patterns accumulated, the initial enchantment softened into clarity. The Australian lifestyle offered peace, predictability, and space to breathe, but it also asked for compromise, a recalibration of urgency, a surrender of constant acceleration. For some Americans, this recalibration felt restorative. For others, it felt like erosion of momentum, of identity, of long-term vision. Gradually, departure stopped feeling like failure and started to feel like alignment. The decision to leave was rarely dramatic. It unfolded quietly through spreadsheets, late-night reflections, and the steady realization that the life being built no longer mirrored the one imagined. The beaches remained luminous, the skies endlessly open, but the internal calculus had shifted, pointing once again toward movement rather than stillness. By the time the final decisions were made, a pattern had emerged that transcended individual circumstances. Americans who chose to leave were often those who measured life in forward motion, in tangible progress, in milestones achieved and visible. Australia, with its spacious rhythms and cultural patience, offered a mirror that reflected a slower, more deliberate pace, beautiful, yet not universally compatible. The very traits that made the country appealing in the first months, the emphasis on leisure, the communal gentleness, the pervasive calm, gradually became indicators of what could not be sustained for those whose identities were tightly interwoven with ambition and measurable success. Yet, the departures did not signal rejection of the land itself. Rather, they highlighted a fundamental negotiation between lifestyle and expectation. Those who stayed found ways to recalibrate, embracing weekend barbecues not as interruptions, but as essential components of life, treating long public holidays as opportunities rather than obstacles, and recognizing that professional recognition might emerge quietly, incrementally, and without fanfare. Life in Australia, for them, became a lesson in temporal elasticity, in valuing the spaces between achievements as much as the achievements themselves. Children adapted to schools where curiosity and cooperation were prized over competition, learning that knowledge need not be constantly quantified. Commuters found joy in shorter travel times, cleaner streets, and an unhurried public transport system. Markets and neighborhoods reflected a balance of utility and aesthetics rarely observed in major American cities. Even mundane errands became cultural touchpoints, with local norms encouraging patience and consideration over speed and efficiency. These subtle immersions reshaped worldviews in ways both profound and imperceptible. The emotional environment, for those who acclimated, shifted toward steadiness. Frustration born of unmet expectations gave way to a broader tolerance for uncertainty and delay. Stress levels adjusted, not through conscious effort, but as a natural byproduct of living in a society that de-emphasized urgency. Many Americans who stayed discovered that identity could persist without constant acceleration, that value was not solely determined by output, but by presence, participation, and engagement in a larger social fabric. Ultimately, the trend of Americans leaving Australia illuminated a universal cultural insight that the suitability of a place is less about beauty or novelty, and more about the alignment between a society's implicit tempo and an individual's internal rhythm. The country's golden beaches, clear skies, and vibrant urban centres remained unchanged. Yet for some, the very calm that defined Australian life became a subtle force, guiding choices and redirecting futures. Departures were neither failures nor losses, but reflections of deep cultural negotiation, a reminder that movement, in both literal and figurative senses, is sometimes the truest measure of adaptation.